once moved below deck, enslaved people would find themselves stuffed into compartments with ceilings as low as 4.5 feet, where they would spend most of their voyage.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at moments from history that made us lose confidence in humankind. Be warned, we'll be discussing extremely traumatic events.
Christian Armenians in the Ottoman Empire lived as second-class citizens.
9/11.
We saw a lot of things that day that no one should see.
The September 11th attacks in 2001 were one of the largest tragedies in American history, with effects that can still be felt today. Orchestrated by Osama bin Laden, leader of Al-Qaeda, it was a response to America's foreign policy in the Middle East, but it backfired after the U.S. supplied Afghan guerrilla fighters with Western finances. The CIA later called this blowback, but it's actually a perpetuation of the cycle of violence. The attacks on the World Trade Center were horrendous, and so was the war Bush began in retaliation.
All of this was brought upon us in a single day, and night fell on a different world, a world where freedom itself is under attack.
No matter what angle you look at it, the attack and its surrounding events are all extremely sad. Lai Massacre.
The population of the village had been 300 to 400 people, and that very few, if any, escaped.
In 1968, American soldiers deployed in Vietnam murdered up to 504 civilians in the village of Sun Mi during the Vietnam War. They assumed the village was a Viet Cong base of operations, so decided to run in guns blazing. It became almost immediately clear there were no guerrilla fighters present. Regardless of this, the U.S. soldiers went on a killing spree, massacring hundreds from the infants to the elderly.
It's going to be a free-for-all. You can shoot anything you want, anything that moves, as long as he's not one of your own.
Entire families were killed across all generations. It was one of the most abhorrent war crimes in human history. The military tried to cover up the massacre, but their efforts failed.
I couldn't quite accept it. Somehow, I just couldn't believe that not only had so many young American men participated in such an act of barbarism, but that their officers had ordered it.
The massacre at Wounded Knee.
If Custer's Last Stand is a tale of romance and glory for both sides, Wounded Knee is essentially a tale of murder.
Europe's colonization of the Americas resulted in an entire continent's worth of unique cultures being almost completely wiped out. The massacre at Wounded Knee encapsulates the devastating consequences of this centuries-long cultural erasure. On December 29, 1890, U.S. cavalry troops slaughtered roughly 300 Lakota men, women, and children at Wounded Knee Creek, South Dakota.
The cannons fired 2 pounds of shell and shrapnel at the rate of 50 rounds per minute and mowed down everything in their path.
The motivation for the massacre is complicated, but much of it stems from fears surrounding the Lakotas' ghost dance. This dance symbolized hope that their old way of living would return.
The whole crux of the ghost dance was to dance and to pray to our ancestors. And that would help bring the world back to the way it was before white people came.
However, it was interpreted as meaning they would attack the colonizers, leading to the indiscriminate killing of the Lakota people. To add insult to injury, 19 Medals of Honor were awarded to soldiers for service at Wounded Knee. The Nanjing Massacre.
Thousands of people observed a minute's silence to pay tribute. Around 300,000 people were killed by Japanese soldiers during their occupation of the former Chinese capital.
Imperialist Japan, like other imperialist nations, harshly imposed its ideals upon foreign nations. Their actions at Nanjing were a chilling example of humanity's darkest capabilities. In December 1937, Japanese forces captured the city of Nanjing, China. During the 6 weeks that followed, they killed up to 300,000 people. Soldiers systematically executed prisoners of war, civilians, and even children. Their methods were beyond cruel, with stories of Japanese war crimes being some of the most horrific tales in history. Japan still struggles to admit to their misdeeds, with numerous officials downplaying the massacre, believing it's Chinese propaganda. Even Japanese Wikipedia downplays the atrocity.
The anniversary of the invasion has become a national day of remembrance across China.
The Cambodian Genocide. Between 1975 and 79, between 1.5 to 2 million Cambodians were slaughtered by the Khmer Rouge.
The Khmer Rouge was led by Cambodians who dreamed of making their nation a classless society of rice farmers. They opposed capitalist Western imperialism.
The party was led by Pol Pot, the Maoist leader of communism in Cambodia. Unlike most genocides where one group targets another, this atrocity saw the Cambodian government turn on its citizens. Targets included intellectuals, teachers, professionals, and anyone they deemed an enemy. Millions were placed in forced labor camps, or even worse, the infamous killing fields. At these sites, more than 1.3 million were killed.
Outside these executions, 1 million more Cambodians died of starvation, disease, or exhaustion from overwork.
It ended in 1979 when Vietnam invaded Cambodia, but this didn't stop America and China from backing the Khmer Rouge, letting them keep their UN seat in the 80s.
In the years that followed, there was no easy path to justice for victims and their families.
The Rwandan Genocide. In 1994, over 100 days, up to 800,000 Tutsi people were systematically killed in Rwanda. Hutu extremists were responsible, and its death toll makes it one of the fastest and most intense genocides ever. Families were torn apart, with whole communities being destroyed. It wasn't just the militias responsible, with ordinary civilians joining in too, turning on their neighbors and family.
Neighbors killed neighbors, and some husbands even killed their Tutsi wives, saying they would be killed if they refused.
Unfortunately, foreign powers failed to intervene, a haunting reminder of human indifference.
The UN mission was not given a mandate to intervene and stop the killing.
It was a heartbreaking event, and the entire world turning a blind eye shatters faith in humanity.
More than 1.2 million people were tried in local courts for their role in the genocide, and dozens of senior Hutu officials were convicted at a UN tribunal in neighboring Tanzania.
Atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
American scientists had always known the bomb would produce radiation, but the scale of the after effects came as a shocking surprise.
The notion that dropping the bombs on Japan was a necessary evil is a widely believed misconception. Japan was on the verge of surrender, with the Soviet Union and the US naval blockade leaving them in a dire position. Truman dropped the bomb mainly because he wanted an unconditional surrender so he could depose the emperor.
Thousands of buildings and homes were instantly destroyed. The flash radiation of heat from the blast scorched hillsides as far as 8,000 feet away.
Well, General MacArthur refused to depose him regardless. Many believe they were dropped to intimidate the Soviets. They targeted civilians, with one exploding directly above a hospital. It began a nuclear arms race where we're now constantly under the threat of self-annihilation. These bombings are a testament to the dangers of extreme nationalism, where the pursuit of power is placed above the sanctity of human life. The Armenian Genocide.
Christian Armenians in the Ottoman Empire lived as second-class citizens.
The Ottoman Empire systematically killed an estimated 1.5 million Armenians between 1915 and 1917. Their empire was weak after suffering serious military defeats. Leaders became anxious that the Armenians would take advantage of their weakness and claim independence. This motivated the government to sponsor an ethnic cleansing. The international community made little effort to intervene, prioritizing wartime interests over human life.
Most Armenians were marched to concentration camps in the Syrian desert.
To this day, Turkey denies that it was a genocide. In actuality, the term genocide has its roots in the Armenian extermination and the Holocaust. Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin coined the term and established the Genocide Convention, which criminalized such callous destruction of human life.
The Turkish government denies this genocide occurred. Official government language acknowledges the violence, but defines the Ottomans' actions as necessary measures and Armenian deaths as unfortunate consequences.
The Transatlantic Slave Trade. The mass exploitation of an entire continent left scars that humanity's still struggling with. It was one of the most brutal, dehumanizing, and darkest chapters of history, and involved the forced transportation of over 12 million Africans, with millions dying during the voyage.
Once moved below deck, enslaved people would find themselves stuffed into compartments with ceilings as low as 4.5 feet, where they would spend most of their voyage.
They were reduced to complete poverty, dehumanized, and sold like cattle. It's impossible to overstate its brutality. Slavery fostered a false belief in racial superiority, deeply embedding racism in the West. This heinous system was the backbone of European empires. There aren't enough words to describe its barbarity. Unfortunately, slavery isn't a thing of the past. Some estimate that more people are involved in forced labor for no pay today than ever before.
It really is a testament to the human spirit that African Americans were able to survive that system and ultimately to be able to do great things coming out of that system.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. The Holocaust.
Hitler ordered a rounding up of Jews, as well as other groups he hated, including gay people, Roma gypsies, and people with disabilities.
Words cannot capture the immense cruelty of the Holocaust. Ideology, hatred, and indifference led to the deaths of millions. It wasn't a breakdown of law and order, it was a cold, calculated extermination. motivated by extreme nationalism and anti-Semitism. People endured unimaginable suffering such as forced labor, starvation, medical experimentation, and brutal executions.
The Nazis designed everything so that concentration camps would be places of immense suffering.
The most terrifying aspect is the Nazi regime's level of organization and efficiency. Its scars are still felt today, inflicting intergenerational trauma on millions. As dark as it was, we must never forget it.
Millions died because of the brutality of life in concentration camps. But the Nazis built other camps, known as extermination or death camps. In these, they deliberately murdered millions of people.